Chapter 9 of Plain Tales from the Hills. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Harris. Plain Tales from the Hills by Rudyard Kipling. Chapter 9. His Chance in Life. Then a pile of heads be laid, 30,000 heaped on high, all to please the Kaffir maid, where the Oxus ripples by. Grimly spake Atullah Khan, Love hath made this thing a man. From Mawata's story. If you go straight away from levees and government house lists, past trades balls, far beyond everything and everybody you ever knew in your respectable life, you cross, in time, the border line, where the last drop of white blood ends and the full tide of black sets in. It would be easier to talk to a new-made Duchess on the spur of the moment than to the borderline folk, without violating some of their conventions or hurting their feelings. The black and the white mix very quaintly in their ways. Sometimes the white shows in spurts of fierce, childish pride, which is pride of race run crooked, and sometimes the black in still fiercer abasement and humility, half heathenish customs and strange, unaccountable impulses to crime. One of these days this people understand they are far lower than the class whence D'Arozio, the man who imitated Byron, sprung, will turn out a writer or a poet, and then we shall know how they live and what they feel. In the meantime, any stories about them cannot be absolutely correct in fact or inference. Miss Vezzis came from across the border line to look after some children who belonged to a lady until a regularly ordained nurse could come out. The lady said Miss Vezzis was bad, dirty, and an inattentive nurse. It never struck her that Miss Vezzis had her own life to lead, and her own affairs to worry over, and that these affairs were the most important things in the world to Miss Vezzis. Very few mistresses admit this sort of reasoning. Miss Vezzis was as black as a boot, and, to our standard of taste, hideously ugly. She wore cotton print gowns and bulged shoes, and when she lost her temper with the children, she abused them in the language of the borderline, which is part English, part Portuguese, and part native. She was not attractive, but she had her pride, and she preferred being called Miss Vezzis. Every Sunday she dressed herself wonderfully and went to see her mamma, who lived, for the most part, on an old cane chair and a greasy tussore silk dressing gown, and a big rabbit warren of a house full of Vezzises, Pereiras, Ribeiras, Lisboas, and Gonsalveses, and a floating population of loafers, besides fragments of the day's bazaar, garlic, stale incense, clothes thrown on the floor, petticoats hung on strings for screens, old bottles, pewter crucifixes, dried immortelles, pariah puppies, plaster images of the Virgin, and hats without crowns. Miss Vezzis drew 20 rupees a month for acting as nurse, and she squabbled weekly with her mamma as to the percentage to be given toward housekeeping. When the quarrel was over, Michel de Cruz used to shamble across the low mud wall of the compound and make love to Miss Vezzis after the fashion of the borderline, which is hedged about with much ceremony. Michel was a poor, sickly weed and very black, but he had his pride. He would not be seen smoking a hookah for anything, and he looked down on natives as only a man with 7/8 native blood in his veins can. The Vezzis family had their pride too. They traced their descent from a mythical plate-layer who had worked on the Soane Bridge when railways were new in India, and they valued their English origin. Michel was a telegraph signaller on Rs.35 a month. The fact that he was in government employ made Mrs. Vezzis lenient to the shortcomings of his ancestors. There was a compromising legend, Dom Anna the tailor brought it from Poonani, that a black Jew of Cochin had once married into the de Cruz family, while it was an open secret that an uncle of Mrs. de Cruz was at that very time doing menial work connected with cooking for a club in southern India. He sent Mrs. de Cruz 7 rupees 8 annas a month, but she felt the disgrace to the family very keenly all the same. However, in the course of a few Sundays, Mrs. Vezzis brought herself to overlook these blemishes, and gave her consent to the marriage of her daughter with Michel, on condition that Michel should have at least 50 rupees a month to start married life upon. This wonderful prudence must have been a lingering touch of the mythical platelayer's Yorkshire blood, for across the borderline people take a pride in marrying when they please, not when they can. Having regard to his departmental prospects, Miss Vezzis might as well have asked Michel to go away and come back with the moon in his pocket. But Michel was deeply in love with Miss Vezzis, and that helped him to endure. He accompanied Miss Vezzis to Mass one Sunday, and after Mass, walking home through the hot, stale dust with her hand in his, he swore by several saints whose names would not interest you, never to forget Miss Vezzis, and she swore by her honour and the saints. The oath runs rather curiously, in nomine sanctissime, whatever the name of the she-saint is, and so forth, ending with a kiss on the forehead, a kiss on the left cheek, and a kiss on the mouth. Never to forget Michel. Next week Michel was transferred, and Miss Vezzis dropped tears upon the window sash of the intermediate compartment as it left the station. If you look at the telegraph map of India, you'll see a long line skirting the coast from Bakkarganj to Madras. Michel was ordered to Tibasu, a little sub-office 1/3 down this line, to send messages on from Berhampur to Chikakola, and to think of Miss Vezzis and his chances of getting 50 rupees a month out of office hours. He had the noise of the Bay of Bengal and a Bengali babu for company. Nothing more. He sent foolish letters with crosses tucked inside the flaps of the envelopes to Miss Vezzis. When he had been at Tibasu for nearly 3 weeks, his chance came. Never forget that unless the outward and visible signs of our authority are always before a native, he is as incapable as a child of understanding what authority means, or where is the danger of disobeying it. Tibasu was a forgotten little place with a few Orissa Mohammedans in it. These, hearing nothing of the Collector Sahib for some time, and heartily despising the Hindu sub-judge, arranged to start a little Mohurrum riot of their own. But the Hindus turned out and broke their heads, when, finding lawlessness pleasant, Hindus and Mohammedans together raised an aimless sort of Donnybrook just to see how far they could go. They looted each other's shops and paid off private grudges in the regular way. It was a nasty little riot, but not worth putting in the newspapers. Michel was working in his office when he heard the sound that a man never forgets all his life, the ah-ya of an angry crowd. When the sound drops about 3 tones and changes to a thick droning ut, ut, the man who hears it had better go away if he is alone. The native police inspector ran in and told Michel that the town was in an uproar and coming to wreck the telegraph office. The Babu put on his cap and quietly dropped out of the window, while the police inspector, afraid, but obeying the old race instinct which recognizes a drop of white blood as far as it can be diluted, said, "What orders does the Sahib give?" The Sahib decided Michel. Though horribly frightened, he felt that, for the hour, he, the man with the Cochin Jew and the menial uncle in his pedigree, was the only representative of English authority in the place. Then he thought of Miss Vezzis and the 50 rupees, and took the situation on himself. There were 7 native policemen in Tibasu, and 4 crazy smooth-bore muskets among them. All the men were grey with fear, but not beyond leading. Michel dropped the key of the telegraph instrument and went out at the head of his army to meet the mob. As the shouting crew came round a corner of the road, he dropped and fired, the men behind him loosing instinctively at the same time. The whole crowd, curs to the backbone, yelled and ran, leaving one man dead and another dying in the road. Michel was sweating with fear, but he kept his weakness under, and went down into the town, past the house where the sub-judge had barricaded himself. The streets were empty. Tibasu was more frightened than Michel, for the mob had been taken at the right time. Michel returned to the telegraph office and sent a message to Chikakola asking for help. Before an answer came, he received a deputation of the elders of Tibasu, telling him that the sub-judge said his actions generally were unconstitutional and trying to bully him. But the heart of Michel de Cruz was big and white in his breast, because of his love for Miss Vezzis, the nurse girl, and because he had tasted for the first time responsibility and success. Those two make an intoxicating drink, and have ruined more men than ever has whiskey. Michel answered that the sub-judge might say what he pleased, but until the assistant collector came, The telegraph signaller was the Government of India in Tibasu, and the elders of the town would be held accountable for further rioting. Then they bowed their heads and said, "Show mercy," or words to that effect, and went back in great fear, each accusing the other of having begun the rioting. Early in the dawn, after a night's patrol with his 7 policemen, Michel went down the road, musket in hand, to meet the assistant collector, who had ridden in to quell Tibasu. But in the presence of this young Englishman, Michel felt himself slipping back more and more into the native, and the tale of the Tibasu riots ended with the strain on the teller in an hysterical outburst of tears, bred by sorrow that he had killed a man, shame that he could not feel as uplifted as he had felt throughout the night, and childish anger that his tongue could not do justice to his great deeds. It was the white drop in Michel's veins dying out, though he did not know it. But the Englishman understood, and after he had schooled those men of Tibasu, and had conferred with the sub-judge till that excellent official turned green, he found time to draft an official letter describing the conduct of Michel, which letter filtered through the proper channel and ended in the transfer of Michel up country once more on the imperial salary of 66 rupees a month. So he and Miss Vezzis were married with great state and ancientry, and now there are several little De Cruzes sprawling about the verandas of the Central Telegraph Office. But if the whole revenue of the department he serves were to be his reward, Michel could never, never repeat what he did at Tibasu for the sake of Miss Vezzis, the nurse girl. Which proves that when a man does good work out of all proportion to his pay, in 7 cases out of 9, there's a woman at the back of the virtue. Oh, the 2 exceptions must have suffered from sunstroke. End of Chapter 9. His Chance in Life. Recording by Mike Harris.